Hello, good evening and welcome. This is BizFirst Review 360, your weekly roundup of the top business stories and developments impacting the Sri Lankan economy. I'm Nadim Majid. Let's get started with the program. Our top story this week, of course, is on GSP+. It's back. What does it hold for the future of the country? We sat down with the head of the EU delegation here in Sri Lanka to talk about GSP+ and other issues surrounding the European Union's relationship with Sri Lanka. GSP Plus comes into effect today, and exporters around Sri Lanka are breathing a sigh of relief. For the country too, for the authorities, the government in power, it is a relief. However, will it become a comfort zone? We've spoken to economists on this program over the past few weeks, and they've warned that Sri Lanka needs to carry out much more structural reforms in order to take full use of the GSP Plus trade concession. Joining us on the show tonight is the Ambassador for the European Union, the head of delegation, Mr. Ambassador Mark. Beg your pardon, Ambassador Mark, thank you very much for speaking to BizFirst Review 360. Let me start by asking you, the GSP Plus trade concession, after a long process, has been granted. What sort of mechanisms have been put in place to monitor progress on the commitments that Sri Lanka made to recover the concession?
Good afternoon. First of all, I'm very happy to be here and to join you in this interview. Well, in fact, we still need to put in place the monitoring mechanisms because every country, once it's being granted the GSP Plus, has to decide together with us what are going to be the specific markers. The objective is obviously to ensure better implementation of the 27 international conventions that have been listed and agreed by the government. By the way, these conventions have already been ratified and signed, most of them by previous governments here in Sri Lanka. So it's really about the implementation and to ensure that there is constant progress in the way these conventions are being implemented. The monitoring tools are of two kinds, I would say. You will have on a yearly basis a report that will be produced by the European Commission, in fact DG Trade, who has got the lead on this. And together with us here in the EU delegation in Sri Lanka, we'll be assessing carefully the progress that will have to be made by the government in various areas where we still have concerns. So we'll have to identify together in the coming months what are the main areas of concerns, obviously. It's not about setting precise dates in terms of targets. It's more to ensure that there is always constant progress.
What are the issues, really, that the EU is hoping that Sri Lanka will focus on and improve on? What are the areas of concern?
Well, number one, I would say the proper implementation of the new legislation on counterterrorism. We know that there has been a draft prepared by the government, but what we need to see is how this will finally be adopted by the Parliament, by the Sri Lankan Parliament, and to be at that stage, it will be in conformity with the International Convention on Human Rights.
There have been concerns that have already been raised regarding the policy and legal framework which will form the basis for this counterterrorism bill, regarding the definition of terrorism, that it undermines the Right to Information Act. What are your thoughts on these concerns?
Well, I would say, first of all, what we have been seeing so far is a draft. So it's not the end of the story, and I'd like to insist on that. We want to see the final product. There may be justified, I'm sure. The list of offences seems to be a very long one. But all in all, what is important is that there's a democratic process taking place in the country about this very important piece of legislation. So what I think personally is that your parliament has a key role to play, but also I would say the civil society. And I hear that people are sometimes unhappy. This is the debate that is a debate in a free country. So we are very happy of that, and we will be looking at the final result.
Many unions, even before the GSP Plus trade concession was granted, many unions were saying that the EU should put more pressure on the government to fulfill these commitments before GSP Plus is granted. Where do you stand on these issues now?
I think that in January, on the 11th of January, the Commission was quite clear. After a careful assessment, the Commission decided that there were no, I would say, stringent failures in the implementation by the Sri Lankan government of the 27 international conventions. On that basis, there have been a number of, I would say, debates taking place at the level of the European Parliament, a very democratic institution, at the level of the member states in the Council of Ministers, and the final, I would say, assessment of these two institutions was the same as the one of the Commission. There are no salient failures. There's certainly room for improvement, and that's why we have got the monitoring mechanism. The monitoring mechanism is there to ensure that more progress is being made. I think people don't understand always the purpose of the GSP Plus. When we are granting back GSP Plus, or when we are granting GSP Plus, we don't expect the country to be perfectly in conformity with all the international conventions. It would be impossible. Even for certain of our member states in the European Union, I think there can still be progress in certain areas. So the starting point is not that you need to be perfect to join the club or to get the access to the GSP Plus.
This government has certainly shown more willingness to engage with the European Union than in the past. And this led recently, even before the re-granting of GSP Plus, to the lifting of the ban on seafood exports or imports from Sri Lanka by the European Union. What has the European Union done since to sort of assess governance mechanisms in relation to the issues that were raised initially when the ban was imposed?
Well, the first step was obviously to look if the country was ready to get again the access to the market, the fishery market in the European Union. This took place after a lot of expert missions taking place and assessments about the capacity of the government to make sure that the regulations, the IUU regulations, were duly respected. It took a lot of energy and, I would say, political will for the government to enhance the capacity of the port authorities and of all those responsible of tracing the vessels in high sea to make sure that they were at the required level. And there has been a tremendous improvement in also the money that was made available so as to modernize the ships that were tracing and that need to detect if there are irregularities. Also training of the people that are behind the ports, that are in the vessels, to check all this. So there has been a tremendous effort, and this was recognized last year by giving back the access to the EU market. As you know, it's a very important market for Sri Lanka, and since then, even if the figures are not totally there yet, we noticed that there's an increase in the exports towards the EU.
As I mentioned at the beginning, many economists in Sri Lanka have said that Sri Lanka shouldn't make GSP Plus a comfort zone, and that they should use this opportunity to really go hard at these structural reforms that are needed in terms of tariffs, customs, revenue laws, etc., to really take benefit from it, so that eventually the country can move on from GSP Plus and become a proper global trade player. From the point of view of the European Union, how many years ideally should pass before Sri Lanka is no longer reliant on GSP Plus?
It's an interesting but also a difficult question to answer, because in fact the criteria that are fixed for a country to no longer benefit of GSP Plus when you have got this scheme is linked to the status. For the time being, Sri Lanka is a lower middle income country. When it will no longer be the case and when it will become an upper middle income country, it will lose the advantages of the GSP Plus. How and when this will take place is difficult to judge. There are criteria that make it, I would say, not that easy to lose, I would say, the advantage of GSP Plus, because in order to become an upper middle income country, we need to have for three consecutive years a certain number of criteria that need to be met. So it could be 2021 or it could be later. I'm not in a position to tell you. But certainly as regards the idea of a comfort zone that shouldn't be taken for granted, I really share the views of those who say this should be an opportunity to diversify the exports towards the European Union. It should not be a comfort zone. It should be a good preparation for expanding your market and export opportunities towards the European Union.
So there you have it. Sri Lanka should look at coming off the GSP Plus concession sooner rather than later. Can we achieve upper middle income status by 2021, the benchmark that has been given by the Ambassador? Ambassador, thank you again for being on BizFirst Review 360.
My pleasure. Thank you.
On the other side of this break, a review of the top stories that made headlines this week. Welcome back to BizFirst Review 360. Up next, let's take a look at the top stories that made headlines in the country this week.
The central bank is aiming to purchase $1.2 billion direct from the market to boost reserves this year. A Reuters report quoting the central bank governor, Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, said the bank is projecting foreign reserves to pick up to $7.2 billion by the end of 2017. The move comes after Sri Lanka missed its December end reserve target, agreed with the International Monetary Fund for a $1.5 billion loan facility. Kumaraswamy said a $1.5 billion loan from the recent sovereign bond, another $450 million from a syndicated loan, and a fresh $250 million syndicated loan in the coming weeks could help achieve the $7.2 billion end reserve target. The bank has already purchased around $400 million from the market. A World Bank report says South Asia could have grabbed a bigger share of international trade had its ports improved its efficiency to match the ones in East Asia. The comprehensive World Bank study of the status, structure and efficiencies of the region's container ports found that if ports in Bangladesh, India and Pakistan had been as efficient as those of Sri Lanka, it could have cut shipping costs by up to nearly 9%, boosting the value of the region's exports by up to 7%. Let's have a look.
When it comes to South Asia's competitiveness, performance at its container ports is a crucial factor. Improved ports lead to more trade, which can create opportunities for better jobs and a higher standard of living. A new World Bank report shows that port performance in South Asia is better than it was. But when compared to port performance in other regions, there's still a lot of room for improvement. South Asia lies along the busiest maritime highway in the world. But South Asian countries themselves represent only a small share of world container traffic. That's partly because lower port performance makes shipping a container into or out of South Asia cost more than double what it costs in East Asia and take over 50% longer. The good news is the governments of South Asia have the power to increase performance and competitiveness in the region's ports by implementing 3 proven strategies. Governments must encourage private sector participation within a well-regulated and administered landlord port model, strengthen the governance of port authority boards, and promote competition between and within ports through transparent and competitive concession bidding. This 3-pronged approach has already proven effective internationally and in some of South Asia's best-performing ports. If every South Asian container port performed as well as the region's best, South Asian exports would increase by up to 7%, providing South Asian countries with the potential for stronger economies, better jobs, and a higher standard of living.
Addressing the Women's Leadership Summit 2017, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe called for more participation of women in the economy.
If you look at the space that's available for women in the economic sphere and the space that is occupied, there's much more to be covered. The space that is open may be 5 times or more than the space that is occupied. We are one of the least integrated regions in the world, and our integration even in the world economy is limited. South Asia has a good future. If you look at 2050, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh will have a tremendous growth in population. So is Myanmar and Indonesia. On the other hand, East Africa, parts of West Asia. So this is where the growth is. But to benefit from that growth, we have to ensure that we are fully integrated and each of our national economies can also respond to the challenge. In that, we have to ensure that women are given, have the right, not given, have the right to ensure that they have full participation in the economy, and it is that opportunity that will propel growth.
Rifa Mustafa was appointed as the new chairperson of the SAARC Chamber of the Women Entrepreneurs Council today. Mustafa was handed over the leadership of the council by the outgoing chairperson Shaista Parvez Malik of Pakistan.
The mantle of leadership has returned to Sri Lanka to take over, and it is with great pride and privilege that I take over the baton of leadership, and I am honored by the trust placed in me. I strongly believe that the initiatives taken by SWEC in developing and promoting women entrepreneurship in the region are numerous. Over the years, I am sure you will all agree that women have proved to be the engine of growth, and their interests should be incorporated into the national agendas of each of the SAARC countries.
Rifa Mustafa is also the president of the Women's Chamber of Industry and Commerce in Sri Lanka.
Stay with BizFirst Review 360. When we come back, a chat with an expert on Indo-Lanka relations. Welcome back to the program. How should Sri Lanka manage its relationships with China and with India? I sat down with Dr. Singharaja Thamita Delgoda, a renowned expert on Indian Ocean affairs, to talk about this and more. Sri Lanka is in a pretty tight spot at the present when it comes to international relations, specifically our international relations with our neighbor India and China. Last week, Sri Lanka participated in the One Belt, One Road summit, which was boycotted by the Indian government. How does Sri Lanka navigate this minefield? How does Sri Lanka manage the Chinese dragon and the Indian tiger? How do we ensure that we do not sink in between these two powerhouses? To talk about this and more, we're joined on the show this evening by Dr. Singharaja Thamita Delgoda. He's a historian, an art historian with expertise in international relations, and also, I believe, when it comes to the law of the ocean. Dr. Delgoda, thank you very much for speaking to BizFirst Review 360. My question to you is what I asked just then. How does Sri Lanka navigate this minefield? How do you manage India and China?
China is an economic superpower. It is also a global superpower. India is a regional power, but it is the main power in Sri Lanka's region. You can't compare the amount of investment that China has poured into Sri Lanka. You cannot compare the amount of, actually, China is now the largest source of imports. China is also the largest source of foreign direct investment. On any of those areas, India cannot compete. Yet, at the same time, India is a very powerful regional force, and it has proved in the past that it has had the ability to destabilize Sri Lanka. So this is something that Sri Lanka has to be very careful of. We're navigating between the tiger and the dragon. Ultimately, if you sit on the dragon's back, you will soar into the future. But if you're not careful, the tiger might drag you back into the past.
India's interest in Trincomalee and in developing liquefied natural gas projects in Sri Lanka We saw the memorandum of understanding that was signed between both countries, a whole gamut of various projects. India has, in these past few years, in the post-war period, taken a very keen interest in investing in Sri Lanka. We saw thousands of houses being built, and now the interest in the Trincomalee port. How should policymakers here approach that interest?
Interest in the Trincomalee port is not really commercial because actually the hub port of South Asia is Colombo. Trincomalee is not on any of the trade routes. It's not on the main supply route at all. It's completely out of the way. So the logical conclusion is that India's interest in Trincomalee is actually strategic. And it never expressed an interest in Trincomalee until the Chinese were involved with Hambantota. So there does not seem to be a real commercial rationale which is compelling for Trincomalee at all.
When you say that there isn't a commercial rationale that is compelling for the Indians to be involved in Trincomalee, there's a lot that is left unsaid. So when you say strategic, militarily?
Militarily, navally, Sri Lanka is, well, Trincomalee is the home of the Sri Lankan Navy. It is a vital plank in the country's naval defenses. The Indian Navy, too, is deployed in the Western Indian Ocean and the Eastern Indian Ocean. In the same way that there are these fears about the Chinese Navy using Hambantota, it could be very, very likely that the same fears could arise about the Indian Navy using Trincomalee. And Trincomalee is a vital, very delicately balanced capital territory with 3 communities. And we must remember in 1987, part of the provision was for the North and the East to be merged. So the basic rationale here is, from a Sri Lankan perspective, you do, rather like the Indians, you do not take any chances with national security.
But for India, what they've been saying about Trincomalee, the main interest is in those oil tanks up there. Sri Lanka does not have the capacity to develop, renovate, and make functional those oil tanks up there that were built by the British. For the Indians, isn't that a commercial incentive to come to Trincomalee?
The biggest commercial incentive in Sri Lanka today is the Colombo port city. It could revolutionize the financial future of South Asia, and it is a huge real estate and financial opportunity waiting to happen. It is interesting that India has not expressed an interest, and it's very, very financially viable in Colombo port city. Yet, it has very, very deftly secured the concession in Trincomalee. So that does beg a question. How financially viable is it? I mean, we have no idea when the investment will be released, whether it's actually absolutely necessary at this stage. So from a Sri Lankan policy perspective, it is very interesting that all of this should be happening now. At this time, we have Vesak, we have the speech in the Hill Country, and then we have Trincomalee.
Dr. Sigaraja, sorry, Dr. Delgoda, there has been sort of an invitation as well for India to be involved in Trincomalee. Do you feel that this was done by the Sri Lankan government to sort of counterbalance the dragon in Hambantota?
Well, in one perspective, it's fairly clear because Sri Lanka has this current administration has no option but to say yes to China. Whether it wants to or whether it not, it has no option. At the same time, the more it has to say yes to China, whether it likes it or not, the more it has to say yes to India. So actually now they've had to renegotiate because of the debt situation, their position and their dealings with China after putting Port City on hold. This is the biggest commercial opportunity in Sri Lanka's history. 1.2 billion, 1.4 billion, something like that. Largest FDI ever, largest infrastructure ever. Yet we put it on hold. And we had to change our minds because of the economic imperatives. In that context, we have no option but to actually offer the Indians or let them have what they want, merely to keep the whole situation ticking along. It's not about balance. It's extremely imbalanced, actually, because the chap you like is not the chap who has the money. The chap who has the money actually is the one that everybody is not sure about because of the regional politics. There's also the USA to consider as well. So actually, Sri Lanka, this particular administration, is caught in a very tight situation because it has to say yes to China, but it can't say no to India. So it's not in the position that it can choose its options.
Dr. Delgado, thank you very much for coming on BizFirst Review 360. You've given some very interesting perspectives when it comes to the whole Sino-India-Lanka issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. And that's all we have for you on the program tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't forget to look us up on Facebook. You'll find us at BizFirst Review 360. That's 1ST and 360 in numerals. I'll see you again, same time, same place next week. Good night and good luck.